Hey folks, over the past few weeks I've completed multiple 80 to 85 speedruns in an effort to find the fastest leveling route in Cataclysm Classic. All of these runs were done solo on fresh level 80 characters with absolutely no prequests, so the route I'll show you in this video doesn't require any prior knowledge or preparation. Once you've become confident in this leveling route, you should be able to reliably get characters up to level 85 in around 10 hours, and new players should only expect to be a few hours slower since the routing is relatively straightforward. Finally, since this route is intended to be utilized by all players for the rest of the expansion, I won't be covering any niche advice that only applies to launch day leveling, such as prequests or strategies for getting ahead of the crowd. That being said, I've put together a short video going over that subject on my second channel, and you can find a link to that in the description below. With all of that out of the way, let's jump into the leveling guide. Right out of the gate, from levels 80 to 82, you're presented with two completely different zone options, Mount Hyjal or vashj'ir. Before I discuss each zone in a bit more detail, I'll just get it out of the way right now and let you know that Mount Hyjal is significantly faster than vashj'ir. Many players may already have a general understanding that Hyjal is a better zone, since vashj'ir has garnered quite a reputation over the years for being extremely inefficient. After all, it is the only underwater zone ever created, and a ton of people had a bad time with this place back in original Cataclysm. However, I've started to see many people say things along the lines of, I'm gonna level in vashj'ir to escape the crowds of people in Hyjal. These players likely believe that vashj'ir is only a little bit worse than Hyjal and will be a strong option on launch while it's less crowded, but this could not be further from the truth. During my speedruns, I tested both zones multiple times, and doing the entirety of vashj'ir takes roughly twice as long as Hyjal, while both zones give around the same experience. The biggest issue with vashj'ir is that it has a ton of long roleplay segments, which creates massive bottlenecks in the questing process. This means that it'll be a highly inefficient zone whether you're a new player or an experienced one. In case it isn't obvious already, I don't recommend leveling in vashj'ir at all, since it'll be slower than Hyjal even if you're leveling in a congested server on launch day. That being said, if you do have your heart set on leveling in vashj'ir for whatever reason, there is one small piece of advice I have to give you. Vashj'ir is divided into three subzones, kelp'thar Forest, Shimmering Expanse, and Abyssal Depths. The first two zones, while slow, are not that much worse overall when compared to Hyjal. The real time loss involved in vashj'ir questing comes towards the end of Shimmering Expanse when you begin completing quests as a Naga Battle Maiden. This chain has a lot of forced wait time that massively slows down questing, but it also leads straight into the final zone, Abyssal Depths, which is the worst of the three by far. This third and final zone is the main reason why vashj'ir takes twice as long as Hyjal. If you instead opt to just do kelp'thar Forest and the first half of Shimmering Flats, and then spam dungeons until level 82, you won't end up too far behind the players who level in Hyjal. Now that we've covered that, we can discuss what things will look like if you choose to start your leveling journey in Hyjal. The main way to reach this zone is by picking up the quest off your faction's mission board, and then taking the portal to Moonglade with an Orgrimmar or Stormwind. You'll then need to wait a few minutes while a green dragon slowly flies you up to Hyjal Summit, and you can begin the actual questline. Alternatively, druids are able to teleport directly to Moonglade and begin the questline there, or you can just fly straight into the zone and speak with Ysera to skip the introductory roleplay. For most players, the first method will be the easiest and the fastest, but I wanted to at least acknowledge that there are other ways to reach the zone if you so choose. Once you've actually entered Hyjal, there isn't a ton that you can do to optimize the questing process. Every single quest chain within Hyjal is worth completing, and most of them are fairly straightforward. The only early quest worth discussing is this one where you have to channel an item into Baron Geddon. Baron will periodically pulse heavy fire damage onto anyone standing nearby, and it's really easy to die here if you aren't being careful. Just wait for him to stop casting before you run up and use the quest item. Also, shortly afterwards you can pick up a quest that directs you to the Blackrock Caverns dungeon, but you should ignore this and continue questing in Hyjal. The only other noteworthy thing about Hyjal questing is you may want to stop towards the end and do a few dungeons in order to reach level 82. Just like in vashj'ir, the later stages of Hyjal can be a bit slow, especially when you reach the quests where you go undercover as an agent of the Twilight's Hammer. To be clear, while this part of the zone is a bit slower, it is still significantly faster than anything in vashj'ir and is a perfectly valid way to reach level 82. However, if you enter the zone at exactly level 80 with no additional experience, you'll already be level 81.5 by the time you reach this section, and that is the best possible time to queue for dungeons. Speaking of which, I'm sure many people are curious to know how efficient dungeon spamming is when compared to Hyjal and vashj'ir. Well, this is hard to evaluate perfectly, since dungeon times can vary wildly depending on the quality of the players in your group. I did a few different tests in the beta where I spammed dungeons at lower levels. Most of the time, it ended up feeling considerably slower than solo questing, since I was doing twice as much damage as everyone else despite being the tank. However, I did one particular test run from 80 to 81, where I ran with DPS who had full ICC Heroic Bis, including 2 players who had Shadowmourne. Despite the fact that this group was incredibly stacked and we ended up clearing the dungeons insanely quickly, the total leveling time only ended up being marginally faster than my solo questing times in Hyjal. While it may initially appear like dungeons are a slower method of leveling, this isn't necessarily the case. Dungeons are only slow if you spam them and do absolutely nothing else. They're actually not that bad if you run them only a handful of times in between traditional questing routes. This is because the bulk of the experience you gain from a dungeon will come from the one-time quests, so every run of a dungeon after your first will be far less efficient. When it comes to Cataclysm leveling from 80 to 82, there are a few additional factors that you need to be aware of. From levels 80 to 81, the only 2 available dungeons are Blackrock Caverns and Throne of the Tides. These are both relatively fast and efficient dungeons. However, you're unable to pick up the Throne of the Tides quests until you've completed the entire chain within vashj'ir, and as we've already discussed, doing that is highly impractical. This means that running dungeons from 80 to 81 is usually a bad idea, though this completely changes just one level later. Upon reaching level 81, you'll be able to access both the Stone Core and the Vortex Pinnacle, both of which are very fast and have multiple quests for you to complete. While I wouldn't advise spamming dungeons at this point, it is absolutely worth doing Blackrock Caverns, Vortex Pinnacle, and Stone Core at least one time. You don't unlock any additional options in the random dungeon finder until level 84, so you have plenty of time to complete these instances as you level up. Additionally, I did mention that dungeon spamming is inefficient from an experience standpoint, but it is also important to consider the potential gear upgrades that you could obtain. Immediately at level 80, you're able to earn 308 item level gear by completing Throne of the Tides and Blackrock Caverns, and the level 81 dungeons will drop 318 gear. For reference, most of the gear out of 25 Heroic Icecrown Citadel is 277 item level, so these dungeons would provide upgrades even for characters in full Wrath of the Lich King Bis. If you're leveling a fresh 80 character, some of these dungeon rewards could be close to a 100 item level increase, which would likely save you time in the long run since it would make questing a lot faster. Again, it's really hard to say exactly how efficient dungeons will be for each individual, so you'll just need to make a personal judgment call here. Regardless of which method you've used thus far, upon reaching level 82, all roads will lead to Deepholm. In order to access this zone, you'll need to return to Stormwind or Orgrimmar and complete a short roleplay questline that takes you into the Maelstrom. This next level is extremely straightforward. You want to complete each and every quest you encounter within the zone of Deepholm. Not only are the quests here just generally efficient and easy to complete, but it's also required in order to unlock the Therazane reputation, which is how you'll obtain Epic Shoulder Enchants at level 85. If you switch over to Deepholm instantly upon reaching level 82, which is what I would recommend doing, then completing all of the quests within the zone should get you to roughly level 83 and 1/3. If you want to, it's also not a terrible idea to complete the Therazane daily quests after you finish the zone, since you'll want to be doing these at max level anyways, and they still offer decent experience. You'll also have a bonus dungeon quest for the Stone Core after finishing Deepholm, so if you haven't completed that dungeon by this point, it may be a good idea to stop and do it before you head to the next zone, Uldum. This zone will be unlocked after you've reached level 83, and unlike the previous 3 zones in Cataclysm, you won't receive any free teleports from the questline, and you'll instead need to fly down there yourself. If you have your Hearthstone set to Dalaran, you can use it and then take the nearby Caverns of Time portal to quickly reach Daenerys. The questline for Uldum actually starts just outside the zone in the southwestern corner of Daenerys, and after interacting with a camel and watching a short cutscene, you'll be teleported directly into the center of the zone. You'll then need to complete a few introductory quests before once again being teleported to a town called Ramkahen, which is the primary quest hub for the first half of Uldum. At this point, the zone will open up and multiple sets of quests will become available. Each one will direct you to a separate subzone that contains many additional quests, and while you will need to complete all of these eventually, the order in which you tackle them is entirely up to you. There really isn't any special path through these quests that saves a notable amount of time compared to just completing whatever quest happens to be in front of you. For the most part, Uldum will play out quite similarly to Deepholm in that the quests are relatively linear, they'll take you on a path across most of the zone, and after finishing them you should be close to reaching the next level, 84. However, Uldum has one difference in that there's actually a completely unrelated questline present in the zone, which you can start by speaking to Harrison Jones at Kartut's Tomb, a location in the northeastern corner of Uldum. In case the name of this quest giver wasn't obvious, the entire chain is filled with references to Indiana Jones, and it contains multiple extremely long roleplay segments which are based around scenes from the Indiana Jones movies. This questline is completely disconnected from the main Ramka quests, and since it gives almost no reputation, I would recommend completely ignoring it while you level up. Finally, in the southeastern corner of the zone, you'll eventually encounter a set of side quests that involves killing leper gnomes, and these are not required in order to continue the questline with Ramka. While these quests are fairly iconic, as they end with you turning into a giant ball of fire and slaughtering hundreds of gnomes, it's relatively inefficient and should be skipped if you're looking to optimize your leveling speed. That being said, I can completely understand if your desire to commit a gnomish massacre outweighs your desire for efficient leveling. Once you've finished the main questline in Uldum and reached level 84, you'll be able to enter the final zone, Twilight Highlands, and this is where things get a bit interesting. For starters, actually entering this zone is a far more involved process, and you'll first need to complete a lengthy questline in either Stormwind or Orgrimmar, depending on your faction. Alliance players will need to complete a bunch of quests scattered around the city, which culminates in defusing a gigantic bomb beneath the cathedral. After finishing this, you'll board a plane in the Stormwind Harbor, which teleports you straight into the Twilight Highlands. As for Horde, you'll only have a handful of quests to complete within Orgrimmar itself, but you'll then be directed to fly north towards Bilgewater Harbor in Ashara. After completing a few additional quests within this area, you'll be able to board a Zeppelin which flies you to the Twilight Highlands, but unlike the plane that Alliance players take, the Horde Zeppelin is not an instant teleport. Just boarding it in the first place can take you multiple minutes, since the Zeppelin takes a little while to actually arrive. If you're lucky, you may reach the boarding point after another player has started the quest, and you can board the Zeppelin instantly without waiting on the roleplay. After it takes off, you'll still need to wait through a few minutes of additional roleplay as the Horde air fleet approaches the Twilight Highlands. It's crucial that you don't jump off the Zeppelin too early, as doing so will brick the quest and force you to fly all the way back to Ashara to restart it. Just be patient and wait until the very end of the quest when an interactable parachute appears. Clicking on this parachute will give you credit for completing the quest, and you'll safely drop down to the turn-in below. While Horde and Alliance players will follow completely different questlines at this stage, they're both fairly linear and will follow a similar theme. You'll eventually establish your faction's main town within the zone, and the questline will then open up a bit and provide you with multiple paths. This is probably a good time to mention that level 84 to 85 is incredibly long. In my fastest test run on beta, I reached level 84 at around 7 hours, and it then took me 3 entire hours to finish the last level, almost half the time it took for the previous 4. A large part of this is due to Twilight Highlands, which is not only a colossal zone in terms of quests, but also slows down a lot towards the end due to roleplay. Although the initial quests within the zone are decently efficient, the questing speeds will slow to a crawl towards the end. This is not helped by the fact that many later quests are either really janky or outright bugged, and some of the mobs will begin to hit incredibly hard since your gear will likely fall off in power by this point. Considering how buggy the Cataclysm beta has been, it's hard for me to gauge exactly how many issues in this zone that I've encountered are intended behavior or just temporary bugs that will be fixed before launch, but no matter how you slice it, the end of Twilight Highlands is really bad. You'll ideally want to have reached level 85 before you're forced to do the quests at the Maw of Madness in the northern section of the zone, as everything beyond this point is exceptionally slow and tedious. Additionally, while the Horde questline remains decently efficient for the first half of Twilight Highlands, this is not the case at all for Alliance. The Horde receives many different kill and collect quests which are relatively simple to complete, but the Alliance chains that involve uniting the Wildhammer dwarves are filled with lengthy RP segments that waste a ton of time. For all of these reasons, you'll want to look for alternative methods to reach level 85 once you've exhausted the efficient quests within Twilight Highlands. The first and most obvious method would be to run additional dungeons, and this is an especially good idea at level 84 since you get 3 new options in the random dungeon finder. These are Grim Batol, Halls of Origination, and Lost City of the Tol'vir. While these dungeons are on the slower end, they're going to be worth completing at least once due to the quests. Even afterwards, it's probably going to be faster to spam dungeons than finish the later quests in Twilight Highlands, as I can't stress enough just how slow they really are. In addition to this, there's a few extra quests that you can complete within Twilight Highlands that aren't part of the main chain. For starters, the Crucible of Carnage is an extremely efficient set of quests in the center of the zone, but it's Cataclysm's version of the Ring of Blood, which means you'll need to have a group if you want any chance at killing these mobs. Early on in the expansion, there should be tons of people looking to form groups to complete this questline, so you should have no trouble knocking it out for a bunch of free experience. However, since these quests are impossible to do solo, you'll be forced to skip them if nobody else is around to help you out. Finally, midway through this zone, you'll unlock daily quests for the Dragonmaw Orcs or Wildhammer Dwarves, depending on your faction. Like the aforementioned Therazane dailies, these quests will grant experience and are actually relatively easy to complete, so you should try to finish them in between your dungeon queues. While this final level may end up feeling like a bit of a slog, if you follow these steps you should be able to push through and reach max level in Cataclysm Classic. If you found this video helpful, I'd highly encourage you to toss it a like, as that'll help other people find it as well.